So what time do we want to start? Well, I mean, it's we got a minute, but I didn't know if you want to.
Last time we did like 5 minutes. Yeah, I think we waited like 5 minutes, but there were people like
Are there
actively
people,
walking in.
Yeah, I don't, I mean, I know we have people waiting online, but they'll wait. Thing about doing it from home. You know.
Oh, look at all of those children. Your best over there, but.
Right, for a photo op,
Spread out.
yeah.
How could I get look like?
We have to spread out.
I did that on my book unintentionally.
We could all cram in here. You could be like a representative.
Yeah, half the camera is just zoomed in.
No, it's just all gonna be on mic, right? Yeah.
Jack, you can sit on my lap. Sorry. Elbow.
Wow, this is really fancy.
I know, this is nice in here. Oh my gosh, have you been in the main building?
No, I've never been here until tonight.
You have got to come on a normal day when they're open. Not only are the grounds really beautiful, but the inside of these buildings is
I mean, this building is.
mind boggling.
Yeah, it's supposed to.
And there's a big old carriage house that's, I mean, oh, it's just gorgeous, really gorgeous. And paths and paths, I mean, they have days when you can come and they have bikes that you can rent, or you can bring your own and you can just bike and bike and bike. Do they have maps in the place? No? Well, there's just paths and paths and things.
So cool. I just know it's
It's
farm.
enormous.
I thought it was a farm. Like, I knew nothing about it. Yeah,
Farms.
farms, yes.
Oh, this is kind of slick, isn't it?
Yeah, it used to be Working Dairy Farm.
This is changed.
You don't have to go there. We are looking to connect Habitat to Sourlands. Not the other one.
Bison.
Yes, bison.
Jersey
I
and
was
bison.
regaling Roger with the story about the time that I was driving on the way
I
to
thought we had.
Mead Nursery here,
Uh-huh.
and a mink ran in front of my car. So it was Charles from Duke, me following behind, and a mink ran in between. And I got to the nursery and I got out of my car and I said, Charles, what are the chances that I just saw a mink run across the track? He's like, pretty good. What mink? Huh. I had never seen one.
Oh,
yeah, and
it's
then
7:03.
We've seen a couple.
Oh, the
One.
rare, yeah, the rare plants and the sounds.
This
Yeah,
guy,
We've seen-
we've seen them by
Several times.
our house,
Yeah.
yes, a short-tailed weasel.
Not even come over.
It's 7:03, a little.
I've
over
never
7:00.
seen
Do we
one of
wanna
these
get going?
either.
There's two people. that are not
Oh, there are?
just- Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just getting random people off the road. So, Mike, have you ever seen one of these in the wild here on Duke Farms or? Wow. Have you seen one of these?
There, like, where we saw one was on Wisconsin Trail.
Like right by our
Yeah.
house. Multiple
A few
times.
times, yeah.
Really?
Fast and,
The first time we were
Very
like, is that a
quiet.
ferret? Like, what is
yeah,
that?
it literally looked like a really fast moving ferret that didn't make any noise.
We have more mink.
Oh, that's hilarious.
You just missed my story.
Yeah, they are.
I've only seen one mink in my life.
You know, maybe I'm thinking of ferret.
It was
Well, I
here.
don't, ferrets aren't as cute anymore.
Carolyn and I came up to get some plants, and Charles hopped in the truck and he was driving down
They're like long.
nursery. We were falling behind in our cars, and a mink ran right in between Charles and me.
No
I
kidding.
couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I got to the other side and I was like. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to our semester tonight. Just sure. Can we just have your name? Sure.
100%.
Singh and Satnam Singh.
Well, actually, we said.
Satnam Singh. And then what was your name?
It was,
Singh.
I couldn't believe it.
Oh, are you that?
I think it's like.
Oh. You do.
Right here in the south.
Now, if you guys would like to, take some of our materials, you're more than welcome. This is our latest newsletter, and this was a informational map we have, some different sites and trails.
We get this.
Oh, if you're members, you get this.
No, like online, right?
Yes, oh, yes, but this is our, schedule of our latest talks, you're welcome to take them. For the next one's gonna come up. Just getting started pretty soon. All right. Enjoy. I'll keep a watch for if anybody.
You absolutely may.
Or can people see me?
Lori,
He's the guy to ask.
stand right in front of the podium. Or you decide,
Or,
yeah,
yes,
there you go,
whatever.
you're good.
Is that what I'm looking?
That one, yep,
All right, are we live?
here we go.
Welcome to Duke Farms Deer Management Program with Mike Bellis. The second talk in the Sourland Conservancy's 2023 Talk of the Sourland series. I'm Lori Cleveland, Executive Director of the Sourland Conservancy. It's so good to see everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to ask, how many Sourland Conservancy members are here tonight? Thank you. Thank you for your continued support for our work all year long. Members like you make our work possible. We really can't do it without our members and partners like Duke Farms and our volunteers, of course. Together, we have planted and protected over 35,000 trees and shrubs in the Sourlands since our forest restoration project began in 2020. We're continuing to plant and install deer exclosures this fall. If you're not a member already, please consider joining and supporting our work and help us spread the word. I'd also like to thank the Sourland Conservancy staff and volunteers who plan and run our educational seminars and webinars. Please raise your hands. Be sure to say hi on your way out. Again, we really can't do it without you. Thank you. And finally, I'd like to thank Duke Farms for graciously opening their doors and welcoming us all. If this is your first in-person Talk of the Sourlands seminar, here's how it goes. I'll introduce our speaker. He'll present for about an hour.
Yeah.
Yes. And then answer your questions. We are recording and we're hoping to share this presentation with folks who couldn't join us. We're new to this technology, so fingers crossed. We will send all registered participants a followed up email with links, books, articles, or other details that this evening's presenter refers to in his talk, so you can learn more about the topic. Please keep an eye out for that email. There will also be a link in that email for a very short survey. We've heard that folks are having trouble finding our events, so we want to make sure that we know how you found us and hear your suggestions for how we can improve overall. Thank you in advance for filling that out. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker. Mike Bellis has been professionally managing both flora and fauna for the purpose of ecological restoration for the last 13 years. After graduating from McDaniel College with a degree in environmental policy in 2010, he gained practical field knowledge and local flora identification skills while working for the New Jersey Invasive Species Strike Team and Monmouth County Park System, focusing on forest restoration efforts. Mike began his tenure at Duke Farms in 2013, where he is the manager of habitat restoration. His primary responsibilities include working with his team to continually improve and measure the ecological integrity and biodiversity of the many habitat types that comprise the 2,700-acre property. Mike specializes in deer management with a focus on herd population reduction, as well as deer management program creation
and implementation. He has co-created 3 DMPs and has been involved in over 10 DMPs. He works with New Jersey Fish and Wildlife to perform annual deer population density surveys. And currently, the best part of Mike's job at Duke Farms, in his own words, are having the privilege of managing a dedicated group of colleagues who are as passionate about ecology and their place in it as I am. Thank you, Mike. Take it away.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Mike. I'm the manager of habitat restoration here at Duke Farms. I have been working here for 10.5 years. And, in addition to the things that Lori just said, my personal and professional passion is largely fueled by deer management and how it affects the ecology of the region that we live in. And as Lori also said, I have a pretty good deal of experience with not just this deer management program, but others in the Tri-County area, if you will. I've participated in them, created them, implemented them, recruited for them, sat on a deer management advisory committee in Hopewell Township for a number of years. And it's just something that has been a great professional influence for me, and I've got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge from because I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of great people. And one of the things that Mark and I were talking about before this started is like, how do you get into hunting, whether it's like recreational or deer management focused, or like how do you get into it? And my story is a little bit interesting because I think something that is commonly found is that people who hunt have a tradition of hunting in their family. It's like, like their parents did it, or, their mentor, whoever it may be, or there's like, grandparents' farm that they had access to. And that's really, really wonderful. But there's also a pretty decent amount of people who don't have that as a lifestyle when they're young. And I was actually in that boat. I did not grow up in a hunting family. There was no tradition of deer hunting or deer management. And actually, ironically, I was a vegetarian for 14 years, from birth till age 14. And that kind of gets a chuckle out of some people. But when I was a kid, I remember I used to go on Saturdays to get pizza with my dad for lunch. That's what we did every weekend. And I was probably about 5 years old, and we were in the town I grew up in this pizzeria we always went to. And it was late September, and these 2 gentlemen walked in. They had clearly just finished, hunting, and they were coming to get lunch. And this one gentleman, he's got his camo on, and he had a quiver just like that. And it was swinging on his hip as he walked in. And I remember just being like mesmerized by the arrows. And I will never forget, they had like real feathered fletching, and they were purple and yellow. And for some reason, it was just like the draw was always there for me, but there was not a venue for me to like exercise it or pursue it. So fast forward, when I was 14, I told my parents, I think I want to get into deer hunting. And they said, we respect that if you want to do it, but you have to make, sort of an adult decision to no longer be a vegetarian, because we'll support you trying something new, but you can't like take a deer just for the sake of taking it. You have to consume it. And it was like a hard decision for me, because I was kind of diverting away from what my family did. And I slept on it for quite a while and ended up pursuing it. And now nobody in my family is a vegetarian. Seriously. So anyway, that's just, I don't know, a little bit about me. Nothing to do with deer management at Duke Farms, but that's a little bit of my background. So into the presentation in front of me, deer management at Duke Farms. So this first slide is a picture from this property. It was taken in skeet shoot fields, which is part of what we refer to as the western fields, western portion of the property. Skeet shoot fields currently is one of our premium grassland breeding bird habitats on this property, and arguably in the state. It's just under 200 acres. It has been in active grassland management for over a decade. And this particular picture was taken in 2000, 2001, before any real deer management was happening here. And so when we used to do, you could do nightly surveys, there was in excess of 150 deer every single night in this field, in this 189 acre field. In this picture alone, I think there's like 42 or 43. So this is just a tiny little snapshot of what this property used to have in terms of deer density. This is an aerial map of the entire property itself. Skeet shoot is. This is the skeet shoot fields I was just talking about, so that's about 200 acres just for context. The entire property itself is about 2,700 acres. We are bordered by Raritan to the north, Manville to the east, Hillsborough to the south and west. And so basically what that equates to is we're surrounded by development. And our property historically has acted as a sink for resident, suburban, and urban deer populations all around our property border. And so the story of this deer management program is kind of a unique one, and it's a very long-standing one. And so where we initially began, when I say where we began, I'm talking about prior to 2004, which is when our deer management program officially started. So prior to 2004, there was no meaningful deer management whatsoever. And when I say meaningful, I mean deer management with a focus on antlerless or female population reduction. There's always the occasional hunter that sneaks in here or there, but nothing that affected the actual density. And on the contrary, there were so many deer here that there was staff that were part of their job was to supplementally feed them through the winter and into the early spring, because there was so little food left. The carrying capacity of this property was basically surpassed. And just for context, 250 deer per square mile, which is what we used to have, multiplied by the acreage of this property, which equates to about 4.2 square miles, was roughly 1,100 deer living on this property in any given year, which is just unbelievable. Oh, there it is. And actually there was some of the deer that did pass away over the course of the winter, just to sort of like prove the point that the carrying capacity was totally surpassed. We had the state do necropsies on multiple deer that had been deceased, and they were proven to have died from malnutrition, which is sad. It's a shame. When you have deer densities in that range, one of the first things that really suffers from a ecological landscape perspective is your forest understory. Your forest is supposed to be made up of 4 layers. Starting on the ground, you have your herbaceous layer, and then your shrub, sapling, tree, recruit layer, which is eventually going to be the last and 4th layer, the overstory layer. And if you are familiar with plant ID and you look at this picture, you will see there is literally one native layer, which is the overstory tree layer that the deer can't reach. And everything else is completely devoid of native plant species. And it's your standard host of barberry, wineberry, and winged euonymus, all of which are invasive, commonly used landscape plants, and largely unpalatable to deer, which is why they're surviving in this, this density. The picture on the right is actually from Skeet Shoot Field in the early spring, mid-spring, like late April. It looks like an army of landscapers came through and just cut everything up to the browse line, which is basically as far as a deer's head can reach up, and they eat it and it's gone. This is not a super geographically diverse property. It's fairly flat. In the park area, which we call the core, you could literally see from one side to the other, which is 640 acres. It's 1 square mile currently. It's all fenced in, but you could literally see from one end to the other on a clear day. There was nothing there. And here's an example of the winged euonymus I'm talking about, just a common ornamental, frequently used landscape plant that deer shouldn't even really be eating, but because there's nothing left, this is what they're left to consume, and the browse line is like really, really obvious. So basically, what we did in 1999 was set up a very preliminary exclusionary fence just to see what would grow in the absence of deer. And in 1 year, the difference is very obvious, visually obvious. The first thing that came back was herbaceous layer regeneration. And of note, we had a lot of spring ephemerals that came back, which showed that they were always there. They were just waiting for an opportunity to not be eaten. And Virginia bluebells were one of the most common. And following that, there was woody tree regeneration, namely red oak and sugar maple. So this exclusionary fence basically gave us a justification to say, look, this is what should be growing. This is why it's not growing. There's too many deer. We have to do something about it. And so we were denied the ability to implement a management program at that point in time. And so the next sort of evolution of deer removal was to experiment with a trap and transfer program, which at this time you would never be allowed to do for fear of disease transmission, such as chronic wasting disease, for example. But we did get permission to do it from the years of 2000 to 2003. So as you can see, 259 deer were removed over a 3-year period, which was extremely expensive. 22 years ago, it was $1,400 a deer. And so basically 259 deer cost us $362,600 to trap and transfer. And that transfer permit was issued by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection with support from Rutgers University. So it was an experimental operation, but basically it had no meaningful reduction on our resident deer herd. Additionally, it's also very stressful for the animal to go through that process, and the survival rate after you release them is probably not preferable. So basically what this trap and transfer program or operation looked like was semi-permanent, sort of like funnels that were created. And inside, once you went through the funnel, there was I forget what they used. It was like a sweet horse feed as bait to draw the deer in, and it absolutely worked. But again, even that process is very labor intensive, and the number of deer removed just didn't keep up with the fecundity rate of the animals themselves. So once we had them in the corral, they got loaded into a trailer and taken. I'm actually not 100% sure where they got taken to. Somewhere else, not this property. So more or less, we had no deer management for a long time. Exclusionary fencing, which proved how much regeneration potential there actually was. A denial of a lethal management program, an experimental trap and transfer. It didn't work. And so now we're basically coming begging, like, please, we've got to do something legitimate. And so we had to get approval from a variety of agencies, individuals, and experts. And these are literally all entities that were involved prior to 2004 to come up with this strategy. And basically what the strategy included is a multi-stepped program plan, and it combined exclusionary fencing, which we now have and have had for a long time inside the park, controlled management for the duration of the state mandated hunting season with a volunteer deer management team, agricultural depredation. Basically what that is, if you're not familiar with it, if you have standing traditional crops, soybeans, alfalfa, corn, something like that, and you can prove a financial loss due to an overabundant deer herd consuming that crop, you can get permission to remove deer lethally outside of the state hunting season. The state hunting season is generally September to February, which is not when you're growing soybeans and corn. So this generally takes place over the summer, and you would be issued a predetermined number of tags if you were to keep the venison for your own consumption. Otherwise, it's basically just remove them. We also implemented a professional sharpshooting firm for the initial kickoff of this program to accomplish what we refer to as a saturation hunt. And from the beginning all the way up till now, what is a very critical component of this program are highly organized deer drives. Basically, what a deer drive is a given part of the property that you have people set up on the ground on foot, which is your drive line, and they have consistent spacing from each participant to each participant. And what they'll do is walk in a given habitat at a slow pace and try to maintain whatever orientation they start with. If it's a straight line, everybody tries to keep a straight line. If it's sort of like a curved horseshoe, you try to keep that horseshoe. And you're communicating via radio. And as you slowly walk, any deer that are in that habitat, that forest, wherever you may be, they get encouraged to move, away from you. Where they're being bumped or pushed or driven to, you would have deer management teams stationed in an elevated position like a tree stand. And what it creates is a situation where you can harvest a high number of animals in a very short period of time. And it's been a very important part of our program overall. So when this program started, there's a great deal of interest from hunters from all over the place. It's what a lot of hunters, recreational hunters, would refer to as a target-rich environment. And so they wanted to participate for, obviously we wanted it for ecological improvement. They want it for, a recreational interest, and it's sort of a mutually, or benefits each other. But more hunters is not always better. And I'll explain why a little later, but long story short, we had 300 applicants initially, which is a lot of applicants to go through. And we used a number of methodology to sort of like whittle that number down, like proficiency, shoots, mandatory orientation. You have to have liability paperwork and go through, sort of like a vetting process. And so basically we went from 300 to 70, and those 70 participants were broken into 10 teams throughout the property, which 70 people is still a lot, to be honest with you. But it was a big drop from the initial 300 candidate pool. And to this day, we actually still require qualifying shoots. Our team now is 15 people, me being one of them, and my director, my boss, Tom Almendinger. And so one of the reasons we do this is it's sort of a historically implemented part of our program, but also there's some amount of like encouragement to be proficient with the equipment you're going out with. And there's something very different, just personally speaking, about being in front of a group of your team members, and you're expected to be able to perform at a certain level. And now when you're having to do it in front of people, it's like if you played golf and you're at the driving range, it's probably different when you're by yourself versus like all your friends behind you watching what you're doing. And it really does, it encourages, consistency in your marksmanship. And it's something that's been important for us. So first season that we kicked this thing off, 2004, we harvested 608 deer from 2,700 acres. 281 of them were female from this, where literally the area we're sitting right now, the farm. 111 male from this area, and then the park is, where all of our visitors go to now inside the fence, which the numbers are obviously much lower in the fence now than they were then, but it was still a substantial amount, 132 female and 84 male. And so this slide is as simple as it is this is something that I am probably the most proud of when it comes to this deer management program, because This might sound harsh, but any average hunter can harvest deer where there are a lot of deer to be harvested. And it's easy to maintain somebody's interest as a hunter when there's a lot of opportunity. But there's been a lot of research that shows when herd densities dip below 50 deer per square mile, recreational interest starts to drop. And the reason is because people are not doing this professionally. They're taking vacation days, they're taking time off of work, they're, whatever their situation may be, and they want to see deer when they go hunting. They want to have the opportunity to take one home. And so when you're starting at over 200 per square mile, you're going to get a deer every time you go out. You start dropping below 50, now it's a quarter of that. It's a big difference. So in 2 years of management hunting, we took our herd resident density from 200 plus to 34 per square mile. And what I really like to see is for all the years, I only have this till 2019, but from 2006 until I have numbers to 2022, our herd density has sort of ebbed and flowed between the highest is 38 and the lowest is just above 17 and a quarter, 17 per square mile. That's a very hard thing to accomplish. And it's the people that are still with this program are very dedicated to the reason that we're doing it, which is for ecological health and biodiversity. And if that's not something that a hunter values, then honestly, it's going to be hard pressed to keep their interest in a program that is this successful for this long. So yeah, basically the average that we have maintained for almost 2 decades is 27.2 deer per square mile. It's an 89% reduction in our pre-management estimates. Just for context, I live in Hopewell Township, and doing spotlight density surveys with the Division of Fish and Wildlife every year for almost the last decade, with the exception of years where we experienced EHD, blue tongue disease. Hopewell's deer density is somewhere between 90 and 110 per square mile. It's a lot. That's a lot. Now, this property was double that. And you think about those numbers, it's unreal. So to drop it 89% and keep it like that for 20 years, you're doing something. And what the result of that is a really unbelievable increase in native plant composition in our meadows, successional forests, old growth forests, etc. So what this graph basically is very simply illustrating is the increase in native plant cover compared to invasive plant cover from our program's inception over the last almost 20 years. And some of our woodlots and habitats have done better than others. Obviously, inside the fence has done exceptionally well, which is where oak woods, migration woods, all the names up top are coming from. But oak woods saw almost a 90% increase in native plant cover. Like, that's unheard of. And there are two anomalies. The two on the bottom, Oasis and EWPP East. Basically, what we're speculating is those isolated habitats had such poor native seed stock in the soil to begin with that the deer were actually eating the invasives that were growing there. Remove an overabundance of deer, the invasives just took off and sort of like took up the dirt, took up the area where anything, so nothing else germinated. So I can't say it's 100% perfect, but it's almost perfect. Anyway, just a couple data sets here. This is, there's still people that are can be sensitive to the topic of deer management for obvious reasons. It's a little bit controversial in some conversations, but there's a lot of good that comes out of it. That's human-centered. That's not strictly, ecology is obviously benefits humans too, but it's not, this is 100% human-centered. We've donated, what is this? so this is through 2018, but tens of thousands of pounds of venison have been donated in the last 20 years. Over 100,000 servings have been provided to people in need at local food banks and shelters. And it's one way to give back and further justify outside of the borders of this property, the positive impact that this program and programs like it can and will have. So there's a lot of deer management programs in this state and other states. I've been involved, like Lori said, in over 10. There's some pretty critical components to this one and why it has been so successful and why we have an 89% reduction in resident deer herd over a 2-decade period. And the first is, from the very beginning, you have to have clear objectives. Everybody who's involved needs to understand that this is not like a trophy buck recreational hunt. This is for the sole purpose of reducing our resident deer herd. So if you are successful, every year you go out, the following year should be more challenging to do what you're out there to do. And you just have to like accept that. One way to make sure that that stays implemented is to have annual harvest goals and individual quotas per hunter. That's not unique to us. There's a lot of programs that do that, especially with a focus on that quota being derived from female harvest. Yes, a buck is another mouth that's eating, native plant material and is rubbing sapling trees and all of this. But if you remove one buck, any other buck can still breed does to increase the population. But when you remove a female, you eliminated the breeding potential. And that's where you really get your herd reduction from. Communication and coordination. So on 2,700 acres, whether we are doing deer management or monitoring native plant response or doing invasive species control, it's very easy to like chase your tail because it's such a big property. So for the purpose of a hunting context, the whole property is broken down into zones. It's in our case, it's lettered zones like M or L or whatever. And it's typically one or maybe two hunters who are designated, their permanent spot is that zone on the property. And in our case, that comes out to be like 80 to 100 acres per hunter, which is plenty of room. So you know where you're going and where your responsibility lies. There's a lead hunter coordinator within the group. In our case, it's actually not an employee. He's a volunteer who has been here since 2004 and has really shown a lot of ownership and leadership and just like commitment to what we're doing. And so if there's, communication between myself or other staff and the deer management team, it's a very linear venue to go through him. He also tends to be, kind of like push the issue and just in terms of rule enforcement, not that we ever have any issues, but just if something needs to be stated or reiterated, or let's say a new gate where there's cows is being locked, he's going to make sure that everybody knows this is where you can go, this is where you can't. Simple logistical things. We all have each other's information. We have a regular preseason meeting every year. All of our team members, the deer management team members, know each other, which vehicles we all drive. Just have a familiarity with who you're in the woods with, which is important. And we do provide incentives and rewards for basically good work. And there's absolutely no tolerance for rule breaking whatsoever. An example of an incentive might be, so we actually provide bait material free of charge, like Duke pays for that, which is I don't know anywhere else that does that. Another incentive might be if you have an exceptional couple years of deer harvest. Like I said, if you are really productive in your zone will become less productive because you've done your job. So maybe that person gets temporary access somewhere else so they can continue that good work. Things like that. The zero tolerance part, the people who are here have been here for so long that they're all great. There's no issues, but historically there have been, and you're out. It's just that simple. Oh, this is basically the breakdown of the property zone wise. Mostly similarly sized with the exception of east of 206. So incentives, this is a little bit interesting. There's something called quality deer management, and the methodology of quality deer management is basically to let antlered bucks that have good antler genetics or good antler potential grow to become of an exceptionally large size, simply put. And I did say before that this program is very much about herd reduction and female deer harvest. But I bring props to make my point for this. Deer hunting as an industry is almost completely based and motivated by and like driven by big bucks. Everybody that you talk to is out there to get a trophy buck, to put it on the wall, to brag about, to send pictures like that. It's almost impossible to break that. And so these are just like normal hunting items and paraphernalia that I have. This is just a tree stand seat for, just a cushion for your rear end. This is a block for sighting in, so your equipment is accurate. This is laundry detergent that eliminates human scent because the deer's sense of smell is its number one. Basically, ability to avoid predation. Their sense of smell is incredible. These are just field knives. That's a corn enhancer. That's a cornless bait / attractant. Peterson's bow hunting, deer and deer hunting, North American whitetail. Do you see what everything on here has antlers on it? Like, these are to attract deer. This is to keep deer from smelling you. This is to process deer. That's to sit in a tree. Like, it's all about deer hunting, but it's all marketed and geared and like showcasing huge bucks with big antlers. Like, it's a tough thing to break. And I bring all this stuff in to show that I think to people who don't hunt or are unfamiliar with it, it almost seems like silly. And I could see why, but like, that's what drives everything. So having a quality deer management principle in our context, basically what it means is we know that we have an exceptionally low resident deer herd, but we want people to be motivated to continue to hunt here, to continue to harvest those female deer. So how do you do that? Short of like paying somebody or whatever. One of the biggest motivators for a hunter is a gigantic buck that they won't have access to anywhere else. So if you have this relatively small, cohesive team like we have, and there's an understanding that, if it's got 6 points or more, let it go. If it's got 8 points or more, let it, or, whatever it is that you're doing. There's this sort of like universal rule that's applied that we want this buck to become this buck. And when he does, somebody might be fortunate enough to get it. But in the meantime, while you're spending time in the woods looking for it, there's going to be does that you are expected to harvest as well. So it's a weird, I get some flack for that sometimes because people are like, oh, I thought this was a management program. Why are you growing big bucks? It's a way to keep people interested. And over a 20-year period, it's the same group of men and women. Like, they've proven that that's not the only thing that motivates them. They're doing what needs to be done. It's just a component. It's one incentive. And it's probably one of the more productive ones. As I said, we provide materials for baiting. Fertilizer costs have gone up. Buying corn is expensive. Having bait provided is a nice incentive for the people in this program. This is always interesting when you donate a deer. If you harvest one and you don't want it, or you don't have anybody that needs the meat, obviously you can't just waste it. You got to do something with it. That's where all those donation poundages came from. it costs money because somebody has to pay the butcher to process it and package it and ship it out to a food bank. We actually cover butchering fees for any size deer. Duke just gets a bill at the end of the year and they write Duke Farms Deer Management Program and boom. So they're not limited by my freezer's full or I don't want to pay for the butchering. We cover that, which is, that's a big one. And then on sort of a friendly competition level, we do keep a running log of like who has harvested what. And so there's a little bit of like friendly camaraderie competition and like who's the best hunter. You know what I mean? Which is always fun. And obviously we closely monitor this program for success, and honestly areas that maybe harvests have decreased a little bit. One of the ways we're doing that is by utilizing drone flyover surveys that we do multiple times a year. We've been doing 2 in the winter during hunting season to assess where herd distribution is in the presence of hunting pressure. And then we do 2 post-season, which is usually like, it's either the end of February and March or March and April. We compare that to the ones that we do during hunting season and see like how the deer herd has moved. Is that in relation to the first available food source or a lack of hunting pressure? And it's been very interesting to sort of analyze the trends over the years. And we sort of correlate that with annual vegetation surveys. And those are of critical importance just to basically say like, are we harvesting enough? Because a lot of people will say like, okay, I have a deer management program. What's a good number of deer to harvest? Not everybody has access to a drone flyover, but you could do all the drone flyovers in the world and say, you know, we've harvested this many deer for this many years. If your native vegetation response is not trending in a positive direction, you are not doing enough, because that's the reason you're doing it. And it's a really black and white way to say like, is this working or is this not working? Are we removing enough or are we not? And over a, 19, 20-year period to see native and invasive plant trends go like this to where we're seeing an 89, 90% increase in oak woods, I think we're harvesting enough. But you have to have baseline and annual measurements to track your progress. And it takes a lot of effort. Just an example of some of the post-season drone work. And then before and after pictures, these are taken the exact same location. There's roughly 15 years in between these pictures. One is Japanese barberry, and it looks like wineberry, and then a bunch of native sapling recruits, which will be next year's overstory. This is our champion red oak on Oakway. As you can see, it was just like golf course flat on the left, and on the right, the limbs grow basically to the ground. The leaves touch the ground and they don't get browsed. And this is the goal. This is what we're going for. Basically a well-stratified forest with really obvious and full and diverse layers from herbaceous to shrub to sapling to overstory. And it's the goal of this program. That's why we're doing what we're doing. So that's sort of the meat and potatoes of where we came from and what our program looks like from like an application standpoint. And what I have over here is, this is where I kind of like to freelance a little bit. There's more than one way to go hunting, but generally speaking, there's some common items, there's some common safety equipment, there's some common methodologies that most people will use that are productive and that we use here. Whether you are performing work with archery equipment or with firearm equipment. So what I should say is in this state, you can use a vertical or like a compound bow. You can use a crossbow. Those are both considered archery equipment. You can use a muzzleloader, which kind of sounds old school, but they're very accurate. And then we also have a shotgun season. There is no rifle hunting for deer in this state. But regardless of which season you're in and which weapon you're utilizing, most people will be doing that from an elevated position in a tree stand. This is good because as you go higher, your human scent gets distributed farther away from the ground level, which is very good, because like I said, a deer's sense of smell is unbelievably acute, and it's one of the first ways that they will be aware of your presence and basically not show up because they know you're there. And there's a couple different kinds of tree stands. One of my personal favorite is called a climbing tree stand. And the reason it's called a climber is it's two different sections, the foot platform and the seat. I wish I had a tree to demonstrate on right here. But you literally just backpack this thing in. You go out to the woods, you have to pick a tree that is like pretty straight with no branches. This part, it's the part you would sit in, put that over. It's actually very comfortable. Got a nice seat cushion. This comes out, it wraps around the tree. Lock it back in, and the same function on the foot platform, and you literally just like ratchet your way up. So you pick the foot platform up, stand up straight, move this higher, pick the foot platform up, stand up straight, move this higher, and then it's the reverse for going back down. What's really nice about these is you don't have to take the time to set something up before the season. It deploys very rapidly, and if you do have what I refer to as a fixed position, and you're seeing deer in an area like 2, 3, 4 times, well, now you have to move your whole setup, which is very labor intensive. Or you could take this and just go over to another spot and go right up the tree. Also, on some properties, whether it's a park commission or private property, a lot of people don't want to see a permanent stand, especially if it's a ladder stand, which is literally a ladder with a seat. I don't have one with me, but it's some people view it as an eyesore. So this goes in and leaves with you, so there's no trace of the tree stand being there when you're done. Another common one is a lock-on. So this is something that would be, I would say, semi-permanently affixed to a tree, typically via like a ratchet strap, like you would tie equipment down on a trailer with. So you have to have some way to get yourself up the tree, and then you would bring this up, and this is the tree, you would put it right there and ratchet strap it, and then you have a foot platform and a seat. These are typically left up for the duration of the season. Some people leave them up longer. And the way you get up to a point on a tree where you want to hang that, there's a couple ways. At Duke, we very strongly encourage the use of climbing sticks. Nothing on this impales the tree. This basically sits up on the tree. It just sits right on the tree, again, with a ratchet strap, and it's like a ladder that gets tied onto the tree. Very low profile. It's not ugly. Very safe, and you're not harming the bark, the cambium layer, nothing. And that obviously important to us because that's what we're trying to do is grow some trees. What a lot of people will use, unfortunately, if people doing it here, is screw-in steps. They are also very discreet, and they're relatively cheap, but to go through the bark, through the cambium layer, into the hardwood, all the way in, and then nobody ever takes them out, and the tree ends up growing around it and create rot spots, and it's a vector for disease. And they do work for getting up a tree, but it's not what we like people to do here. And then, like I said, there's ladder stand, which is what I would say you would see most commonly. It's very affordable and very easy to use, also very safe, just because you're physically holding on to something the whole time. Some people, maybe mobility issues or what have you, these might be out of the question, which is perfectly understandable. So speaking of safety, when you are using either a lock-on or a ladder stand or a climbing stand, mandatory equipment at Duke Farms, and it should be just something that you do no matter where you are, is to wear a safety harness, which is, there's really no excuse not to, because they make them very easy to use. This adjusts depending on your size or what clothes you have on. And the waist portion is just a clasp buckle, and around each leg, almost a car seat belt. Now you've got your safety harness on. This is called a lifeline. Basically what it does is it wraps around the bottom of the tree, like where the root flare is, where you're standing on the ground, and it gets affixed above where your head would be when you're in either of these tree stands. And the sweet part about it is it's got a prusik knot, which is basically a sliding knot. So the rope is always on the tree for the duration of the season. And you're standing on the ground, clip in, go up a couple steps, slide your prusik knot, go up a couple steps, slide it up, and you are literally hooked in and safe for your complete ascent and descent while you're sitting there. We've never had a fall, an issue, an injury, nothing. In the history of this program, it does happen like in America. Like there's somebody that gets hurt every single year because they don't wear a harness, and it's just silly not to, in my opinion. Also, safety, when you are, this is good to know as just, if you're somebody who enjoys the outdoors, there is no orange required to be worn by a hunter during archery season. There is an orange, specific hunter orange required to be worn during firearm season. And the minimum amount is 200 unbroken inches, square inches. So you can't have like decals or like other things on the hat. Basically a hat like this with a brim, that's roughly 200. So if I put that on, that's legal. Some people will wear the vest, some people wear a completely orange suit. I would say if you are somebody who walks the dog, goes for hikes, rides your bike, whatever you do in a natural area, and it's like the end of November through February, give yourself an orange hat, because every hunter should be going out with the mentality of knowing your target and beyond, but maybe sometimes people don't. And it's just a great thing to have that visibility, no matter who you are, if it's firearm season. I would recommend it. Yeah, and so the last hunting setup that you can use, the safety harness is a ground line, and this is, it's actually kind of fun to sit in here, especially if it's like raining or snowing outside. You got your hot chocolate and kind of just hang out. The cool part about these is they set up and take down like really fast. Like I could. You'll see at the end, I can package this thing up in like 2 minutes. And it's a lot of space. You don't have to like spend the time to set up beforehand. And they can be effective in the right context. The problem with a ground blind, as it's referred to, is because you are on the ground, your scent distribution is right at nose level of the deer. So you have to keep the wind in the wind direction in mind when you're deploying one of these. Also from a safety standpoint, when you're in an elevated position, such as a tree stand, whether it's a crossbow, a compound bow, a shotgun, whatever it is, your projectile is going down towards the ground. Whether you get your, whatever happens, if you discharge your weapon, it's going into the ground. With this, it's going straight. So you really have to be responsible as the hunter of knowing what's beyond your target. And to that point, yeah, I mean, if you have spent any time around somebody who hunts, they should know there's a couple major safety rules that are just like universal. Knowing your target and beyond, keeping the muzzle or arrow of your weapon pointed in a safe direction, and treating every weapon as if it's loaded. It's just how it should be conducted, common sense stuff. And then, so these are all like programmatic items that can be used. There are areas on this property that have some geographic variation, so ground blinds could be used, but where it's dead flat, obviously not so much. For what I'll say from a personal standpoint, some of the items that you will need for deer management activities, have everything right in this little pack. Saw and a knife. Have to have your hunting license on you at all times. It has to be visible and displayed on your person. Rangefinder, which basically can be set to be measuring distances in meters or yards, so you know where your target is and how to adjust your shooting position to make an accurate impact. Flashlight for finding your way in the woods, and some sort of paperwork or writing implement to physically tag your deer. So when you are in the woods and you harvest a deer, you have to check it in. When I say check it in, I mean like register that harvest with the state, and you can do that. You can do that on your phone with that Fish and Wildlife app. And when you complete all of the fields, you'll get a confirmation number, which is basically the state's way of saying like this is a unique ID number that you are to put on your deer. So if you were checked by a conservation officer, they can look at this number and know who the deer belongs to. But upon recovering your deer, taking possession of it, meaning physically walking up to it and like put your hands on it, you have to put that confirmation number on that deer somewhere. A lot of people use little manila tags or whatever. I use duct tape because it's quick and cheap. But just something to keep in mind as the hunter. The last thing I forgot to mention that I thought was interesting, there was probably a point that made more sense, but I'm gonna say it now. So with archery equipment, which is often how people break into deer hunting, not because it's easier, but because a lot of landowners are more comfortable with archery as opposed to firearm use. But like me, for example, as I said, I didn't grow up in a hunting family. We didn't have a family farm. So like, how do you find property besides like state land where everybody goes? Oftentimes it's people who are interested in deer management, and oftentimes they're not interested in firearms being discharged, which is perfectly understandable. Or maybe you can't legally do it because there's different safety zones with archery versus firearm. Archery, you need 50 yards from the nearest dwelling. With firearm equipment, it's 150. So 150 feet, 450 feet. And if you're in a tight area, you don't have that, you're not using firearm. There's a difference in the cutting tip of an arrow, or in this case, this is for a crossbow. They refer to this is called bolt in crossbow terminology. It's an arrow, but you'll hear the word bolt too. There's 3 tips that you can put on it. Field point is the first one. It is not lethal. It is not for hunting. It is strictly for sighting in on a target like that to make sure your point of impact is where you want it to be. Once you have that, there's 2 other options. And people in this program will use both. There's what's called a fixed blade broadhead. These are broadheads, fixed blade broadhead and a mechanical broadhead. A fixed blade doesn't move. There's no like moving parts on this. It's just one solid piece, and I think they're very good because once you know how your bow shoots with a particular broadhead, it's very repeatable and consistent. But they also make something called a mechanical broadhead, which in flight is much narrower than a fixed blade, similar to a field point. And the benefit of a mechanical is generally a very high degree of accuracy. But upon reaching its intended target, the blades deploy and it becomes much wider. And it's a very humane way to perform the function. Does anybody have any questions? About anything? Sure. Yes.
What's the, if everyone's comfortable with talking about this, mortality time? Like,
No, that's a good question.
you know what I mean? Like, obviously, it's hunting. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not called, necessarily just harvesting. So I know there's not a perfect scenario, but.
So in a well-performed scenario with archery equipment, you should be looking at a 15-second expiration. 30 seconds at the most, absolutely, yep. It's very humane, very fast.
I always just assumed you were like. Unfortunately, following a blood trail and.
Will, because so like, you know, if I can say this, the expiration from archery is via hemorrhage, and the expiration via firearm is trauma. So there is a difference in tracking distance to recover your animal. But the time elapsed from impact to expiration with a well placed shot is literally 15 to 30 seconds. It's very quick.
And being bow
With archery.
it's like you're not taking a shot at a distance, like.
No, you should not be.
Yeah.
You should know your maximum effective range as an ethical hunter. You know that from sighting in, you know that from the broadheads you're using. And your goal is to not exceed what you are capable of and what your equipment is capable of. And that's your responsibility to do that.
What would you say yours is?
Um,
Not to call you out, I just curious.
so in all seriousness, when I'm in a deer management context, which I say that because that means I'm hunting over bait. A lot of people have an issue with hunting over bait, but you know, it's cheating or you know, what have you, but like deer management is about efficiency. It's about effectiveness and it's about efficiency and maintaining a herd density that is conducive to ecological improvement. That means you need to bait. It's just the way it is. I want that to be as reasonably close to me as it can be. I don't want to be testing my limits every time. I want it to be like muscle memory. I don't even have to think about it. And so for me, that's 15 to 20 yards. I don't want to be like, I think I can do it. Like it's a job. It's like boom, done, boom, done, boom. Repeatability is important. So that to answer your question, can I touch farther than that with archery? Yes, I can, but will I? Not on average, no. 15 to 20. Yes.
So you mentioned the season, so, you know, I know where we live in Hopewell Township, the season is, like you said, September to February. Are you guys doing this year round? Like, how often are you doing it during the season and what is the season?
So literally.
Cause I know you had mentioned getting the permit from the state to do it out of season.
Oh, yeah, so like, you know, in Hopewell, for example, it's the same as Hillsborough in terms of like start time, end time. This year it started on September 9th. And I'll say this, it usually is within a few days of the previous year, the year that's coming, like September 9th, 10th, 11th to February, like 14, 15, 16, somewhere around there. And to get that's outside of that, it has to be the right application. Like I said, if it's a depredation permit, it's the farmer's job to apply and justify that they are experiencing a financial loss due to deer browse. That's not the hunter doing that. And I'm not a farmer, so did that answer your question or?
Partially, so the other part of it was how many days a week, I guess, like how often are you guys, so right now it's hunting season, right? So yeah, how many days a week are you out with the team doing?
That's a good question. So like I said, the property's broken down into zones and certain zones have habitats that are more open, old growth, some are like successional, very like close quarters, some have a lot of meadow. Some are like agricultural fields, like farm oriented. And so each of those will produce deer movement predictability, lack of predictability in like not at the same rate and not at the same time of year. What may be very deer dense early season, maybe that food source dies out and they're gonna move to somewhere where there's late season food source, or maybe what's really open and easy to traverse in October. They're gonna be looking for somewhere that's thicker and has heavier cover in like January. So the number of times that I go out might not be the same number of times that, you know, somebody else goes out. And I'll also say that your ability to, like in the climbing stand, your ability to move from location to location has a big impact on efficiency. So like I could go out to the exact same lock on stand like 4 times a week. Those deer are not like stupid. Like they know eventually, like if you are successful out of that location, they're like, that spot's bad. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going over there during the daylight. So you want to be almost like omnipresent. You want to be able to bounce around. If you have the resources and the habitat that allows you to bounce around, you could hunt 4 or 5 days a week. Alternatively, if you don't, you may be wise to limit the number of times you go out, and your efficiency might actually increase. You'll be more successful on the times that you do. So it's very variable. It's not a direct answer. Yes.
What's a typical shotgun range?
Okay, so when I say shotgun, that's 2 things. That's either what most people think of when you say shotgun, as in like multiple projectiles that exit the barrel and form like a cone, or a slug gun, which is a single projectile, also classified as a shotgun. It's not a rifle, it's still a shotgun caliber, as in like 12 gauge or 20 gauge. But generally speaking, a single projectile slug gun that is scoped will have a greater maximum effective range for the average hunter than a shotgun that shoots shot like buckshot. For consistent harvest, I'm sure there's going to be people that disagree with me on this, but I would say buckshot characteristics, you are pushing your luck past 50 yards. It's really not that much farther than archery. 30 yards is like very effective. Beyond 50, taking your chances.
What's used most?
I'm sorry.
Which type of shot is mostly used?
So for this program, we don't do buckshot. No buckshot is allowed to be used here. It's slug gun only, and that proficiency shoot is sort of like one of the reasons why, because you know, so as I'm going to go down the rabbit hole here, but as shot exits the barrel of a shotgun, the farther down range it goes, the wider the pattern becomes. So you're not getting as many pellets on the intended target as when it's closer to you, but your odds of hitting it are greater because you have a wider cone of fire. So like a lot of people, I don't want to point any fingers, but there's people that are like, they're going to take that chance, and we don't want that here. This is efficient, effective. You need to know where that projectile is going. And that's why we mandate the slug gun usage, because if you sight, not on this block, but if you sight in properly and you know what your maximum effective range is, then it should be a very ethical harvest every single time you engage. So I would say the average person with the slug gun that I'm describing, 100 yards is max. Opposed to like out west where you use a rifle where they take like 500-yard shots or something effectively.
My grandfather had a 30 caliber rifle with a big scope on it, and he took it out once, sighted a deer 1,000 yards away, and he just put the gun down. He said it doesn't have a chance.
See, that's kind of what, that's my point. Thank you for that. Yes.
Was this photo taken inside a fence, or is this just the result of management hunting? And if so, can you expect to see this kind of scenario in 30 deer per square mile, or does it have to be lower in order to be able to have that kind of?
This was taken inside a fence. That's a really good question. So in addition to deer management, one of our very highly valued priorities, and a lot of what my work is focused on, is invasive species management in forest understory and meadow settings, but mostly forest understory. And one of the big issues here on this property, it's a perfect storm for like ecological disaster, because all of this land was manipulated to some extent, whether that was agricultural production or you know, irresponsibly grazed cattle, or the introduction of non-native plant species, whatever it is, and then you let the deer herd go crazy. It was this like I said, it was this perfect storm of like disturbed soil, way too many deer eating native plants, and every exotic plant you could possibly think of intentionally planted here. Just for an example, like we have historical photos from like 1905, Jeff, from this mermaid pond where there's Chinese silvergrass. And guess what we still have a ton of? Because the seed source has been here for over 100 years. Like that's really established. So can you expect that just from removing deer? I'll say this, the order of operations for land stewardship, and I would debate this with just about anybody, is deer management first, invasive species management second, native restoration or native installation third, and monitor fourth. That's the order. So if you got your deer, let's say it's or anywhere outside of Duke and Hillsborough, and it's 100 deer per square mile, if you drop it to 30, you will see some amount of rebound for sure. It depends what your native plant, native seed stock in the soil is. You may also see an invasive jump to some degree because it's not being browsed either. But if you could do all, so this is all maple leaf viburnum. It's a very beneficial understory shrub. You could plant all the maple leaf viburnum until you're blue in the face. If you have 100 deer per square mile, you just wasted time and money. Even if you cage it, even if you put tubes on it, like at some point it's gonna get rubbed, it's gonna get consumed, it's gonna get something. There has to be some amount of deer management test.
Yeah, you're also not getting those 4 layers if you're just planting one thing and tubing it, which we are doing and where we need to. So in places where the soil was disturbed and riparian buffers, we are planting. But this is what we want to see in the end.
Yes.
In order to do that, we need to bring the deer population overall in the Sourlands down to.
I mean, popular science says that 10 per square mile is roughly what pre-colonial estimates were. I don't know too many people or entities that have a more aggressive deer program than ours. You know, for 20 years, the lowest we got, I forget what the number was, but it's mid-20s. To get it lower than that would require biological control. I'm not saying we would implement that. I'm just saying a biological issue would be well, that's what it would take, you know. But the response that we're seeing inside the fence with 20 per square mile, which is realistic, is unbelievable. And that's with invasive management and supplemental planting. So it all feeds each other. Obviously, not everybody, the reality is not everybody has tubes. Not everybody can buy 1,000 plants. Not everybody can put a fence in. And so I'm not saying it's not worth it. But for the best result, that's the order that it needs to be in. Deer, invasive, install, monitor.
I know we've mentioned Hopewell a lot, but why is clearly here, it's 2,700 acres, it's contained, you guys have full control over what you're doing. Like, this is a loaded question, but is that why it's been so successful here, but why like in Hopewell Township where there is a deer management program, but the deer population is still like completely insane? Is it really just as simple as that you guys were able to?
Well, so like we were talking before, in Hopewell, I don't know exactly, but Hopewell is roughly 70% privately owned, Hopewell Township. So there's really, it would be very challenging to have a universally applied deer management effort, because if somebody doesn't want to do it, they don't have to. So there's been a lot of places in Hopewell Township that we have measured and have observed property-wide native vegetation response in a positive trend as a result of good deer management, as a result of good species being sourced and installed at the proper time of year and monitored. To expect that on a township level is very challenging when you can't implement your strategy across the township. But there's properties that, whatever, different land management organizations, different preservation outfits, then they've done a wonderful job. It's just, it requires constant effort like we're doing here. It's just not on 2,700 acres. It might be on 27, you know?
You can go first. I have an online question. Go ahead. Okay. So from online, question is, what is field dressing and how difficult is it to remove the deer from the site?
Oh, that's a good question. So field dressing is basically evisceration or the removal of the internal organs from the deer, obviously, once you've harvested it. And it's important to do it in a timely fashion to allow the internal body temperature to decrease. And it very much reduces the likelihood of meat spoilage. So whether it's a large deer or a small deer, when you recover it, that's when the field dressing would take place. After you make your shot and you get down from your hunting location and you recover it, the first thing you would do is check in with the state and tag it as I described before, the confirmation number and all the applicable information. But immediately following that would be when you would field dress it. And that's honestly what I showed you the saw and the knife was for, just for, performing that function. And then as far as removing it, I'm assuming the question means like from the spot where you found it. That's really variable depending on the field dressed weight of the deer, and the habitat type that you're in. A big open sort of like overstory only forest where, the animal ran a short distance, 50-60 yards, will be a lot less taxing than a rocky terrain where the animal's, over 150 pounds or something.
I have another one from online. How can we go about finding hunters willing to reduce deer populations on a private property?
My phone number is that's a tough question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. I would say that without saying, contacting any of the local land management preservation entities may be a place to start. Ask them either stewardship director or deer management program supervisor is, and would it be okay to, maybe have the contact information of their high deer harvesters in the program. I don't know if that's something that can be shared or not, but to my knowledge, there is not like a, not like a designated place where you would just like go to find that.
Not Craigslist.
No. That would be. Any others, or Jeff, any others?
So one question is, how do you move the needle on a 40-acre property without fencing the entire property? No amount of hunting will help because deer just move in from nearby areas. What kind of techniques are useful? More of a restoration, not necessarily deer management, but.
So it's a meadow and the deer aren't there.
It just says 40-acre property, but they don't want to fence the whole thing. But I guess I'm assuming it's like surrounding by other development, so deer are just kind of coming in from surrounding areas.
Yeah. I mean, at some point. And this is where the challenge comes in with, I'll stop talking about super specifically, just generally speaking, where there's, natural areas that have multiple private ownerships. It becomes a really difficult proposition to meaningfully reduce the deer, because even if you have, say there's a neighboring owner that's very into it, there might be somebody who's very much opposed to it, and their property might, there's people that supplementally feed deer just for the sake of supplementally feeding deer. So if you basically don't have control over that, and if you don't want to fence in the entire 40 acres, my first question would be, how much of it are you willing to fence in, or are you willing to fence any of it? And if you are willing to fence a certain portion of it, I don't know what the composition of this property is, but my personal opinion, and honestly, one of the things we do here is we, in terms of land stewardship and prioritizing it, we will start generally with the oldest growth woodlots first. Or areas based on old aerial surveys have had the least indication of disturbance, soil disturbance, whether it's logging or farming or whatever it may be. Because those spots have the greatest likelihood of producing a native plant rebound if they are fenced in order to, have some amount of deer protection. So that, I think that's what I would ask. If you don't want to fence the whole 40, I understand that's a lot of effort to get that done. I would try to find the area on your property that has the highest ecological potential. That's where I would start my focus. Whether, I don't know if there is a difference, but that's what I would ask.
That's it for the online questions.
My wife and I are lucky enough to have open space at the end of our street. Sometimes it looks like that, which is nice. But and there's the same season as you mentioned, more or less Labor Day to President's Day, we'll say, like right around there. 5 to 6 days a week, archery only. But we'd love to take the dog down there, but we want to respect process. Stay out, limit. And I don't necessarily mean safety wise, like safety wise is on us. Like I understand the hat, we wear vests, like sure. But it's also like, at what point is it counterintuitive just to enjoy yourself in the outdoors when you could maybe go walk somewhere else?
That's a good question. So what a lot of land preservation groups that have hunting, what they'll do is they may have designated dates that the hunting is to take place, and generally that would be pushed on
so Sundays and some Mondays are the days that they don't hunt.
Okay, so obviously that's an easy answer right there. It's just utilize that space on times where there is no hunting permitted. That's why there's a balance.
Yeah.
But if that is not applicable, or if there is no designated time frame when, especially in archery season, when the days are longer and it's warmer out, I would try to focus my recreational activities like midday. Because generally speaking, anybody who's, in this context that we're talking about, if you're going out with archery equipment, it's going to be like before daybreak until 9, 10 o'clock at least. Like you probably have from 10 p.m. to 2 p.m. It's very unlikely that you would be affecting anybody negatively. Not to say that there wouldn't be a hunter out there who wants to get an early start or sit longer, but from a deer standpoint, they're likely to be bed down and aren't going to be presenting an opportunity for a hunter anyway. Thank you. Good. Oh, well, thank you very much. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Thank you very much.
Shameless fun time. We gone?
Yeah.
I can't resist. Okay. So. Oh, that was really good. Thank you so much, Mike. Let's give him another round of applause. Thanks again to Duke Farms and the Conservancy staff and volunteers who worked tirelessly. Please say hi to them on the way out. Also, please watch your inbox for the follow-up email I referenced earlier. And check out these fabulous handouts on your way out. We have another talk coming up, Falcons Masters of the Skies, on November 18th. And we have a fabulous brochure that's brand new. Also, if you're a member, you may have seen this in your mailbox, but if you haven't seen it, we have some copies here. That's our latest Sourland Journal, fresh off the press. We also have our famous owl map, which is a lot of fun, and it also has a guide to where you can find the 25 public parks and preserves in the Sourlands with public hiking trails. And we also have this handy atlas, which shows you those beautiful hiking trails in detail. And so you can challenge yourself by setting out to hike them all maybe. So anyway, thanks again, Mike, and thanks to you all for coming out. We really appreciate it.
Stars, thank you.